huge thanks to Bert Harnish for connecting us to Brad, and then for Brad for saying yes. That was amazing. Brad's been an EO member for so long, like I have, that we both joined when it was MyEO. And, well, then we had to drop the Y because we're no longer young executives anymore, young entrepreneurs. I'm so excited to be here with you, Brad, and I want to introduce the audience to you. We have 29 chapters represented from the Entrepreneurs Organization here, representing 10 countries as far away as Nigeria. Did anyone travel further than Nigeria to get here?
Beijing?
Beijing is...
No, I'm not sure.
I think Nigeria is... Oh, yeah, Brisbane. It's easier. Yeah. So you've got a great audience of very committed, high-performing entrepreneurs and investors in this room that have been members for EO for a couple years, to Bill Trimble, you may know from Vancouver, is a 28-year member, almost a founding member, I think a founding member of the Vancouver chapter. Right, Bill? Yep. And
Bill will always be a founder to me.
Yeah. And Bill was just awarded with something I didn't know even existed. I have a few friends in the EO that have been to 25 universities, and I thought, oh my gosh, how is that even possible? And I think I saw on Boo-Boo's Facebook or someone's Facebook, there's a picture of Bill Trimble with 50 universities he's attended. It's amazing. He told me today that he thinks he's missed only 4 in the last 20 years.
You're my age.
Yeah. I think you look good for 48, so. We have with us today Brad Feld, and he's an American entrepreneur, an author, a blogger. I think you've written at least about 10 books.
Well, not that many, but
Half a dozen, okay. Venture capitalist, and if I wanted to spend time on his entire biography of achievements, that would take 10 minutes, and that would bore him, and you guys can go on to YouTube, Wikipedia, Google him, and I actually highly recommend that you watch his YouTube videos because he's covering so many best practices and learnings and mistakes and battle wounds from what is available on the web. I encourage you to look at that background so that today we spend most of our time just having a casual conversation with him. The session today is called Ask Brad, so you can ask Brad anything you want. And that's kind of the cool thing about this format. For one, Brad doesn't have to prepare a slide deck or a topic, and he just gets to come here and be Brad and share his experience.
And it's 4:30, you guys don't want to look at a bunch of slides anyway.
Yeah. So, I will say this, he started the Foundry Group in 2007, which invests in North American technology companies, and also in specific venture capital fund and fund managers. Brad, you've seen zillions of deals, right? You've seen many, many deals. When you look back at your successes, is there one that stands out that you say, this was a complicated deal and we had amazing success with it? What was the deal that stands out, and what were some of the learnings and takeaways from the deal that would benefit us?
Yeah, I think all of the companies I've been involved in that have been successful were complex in terms of their journeys. None of them were, simple, start the company and everything goes well. I like to say that the vast majority of successful companies have multiple near-death experiences, and every company I've been involved in, including some that were very successful and ultimately failed, had either near-death or death experiences. I'll highlight two, a successful one and a failure, but both that had enormous activity around them. I'll do the failure first because it's more fun to have no success. The failure was a company called Interliant. It was a company I co-founded in 1996 with 3 other people, one of them being a guy named Len Fassler who bought my first company, one being an entrepreneur named Raj Bhargava, who he and I have done 7 or 8 companies since we started working together in the mid-90s. And Interliant was a company that bought web hosting companies at the sort of rise of the commercial internet. So we acquired about 25 companies Most of them pretty small, but as we got bigger, they got bigger too. And if you go back to the mid-90s, some of you may remember companies like Exodus, that was sort of a very big high flyer. I think at one point it was worth $30 billion and then ultimately went bankrupt. When you wanted to host a website, you either had a dedicated server in some facility somewhere or a shared web server. And that business in the 90s was incredibly fragmented. Most of the web hosting companies were, little startups. Most of them weren't funded. Sort of bootstrap businesses growing really quickly. So, our goal was to consolidate that business. Just buying the companies was a challenge because they were all new, young companies. Integrating them both from a business standpoint and a technology standpoint was a complete fucking nightmare because each of them was different.
Right.
And they were small, and most of them were not particularly well managed. We did it at a very rapid pace. We raised a lot of money. We raised about $42 million up front and then $18 million, and then we went public and raised another $37 million. Strategic money from Dell and Microsoft and a few others. And at our peak, the business was about a $3 billion market cap in 1999, 2000. I think it hit its peak spring of 2000. And in 2002, it went bankrupt. And there was a really foundational lesson, many lessons in that business, including the lesson of what it felt like to have made on paper $100 million and then get zero of it out. That's a useful lesson. And after I got zero of it out, I then got sued. I was co-chairman. I got sued personally for fraud in 2002 during the bankruptcy process in 2003. At the time, the people were getting hauled off to jail, Bernie Evans and that sort of thing. And that was interesting. And very enlightening, like to go through a legal process. Originally, we were sued for $150 million, including the directors, but then also a couple of us personally. In the end, ironically, our D&O insurance policy, Director and Officer's insurance policy, which is a $40 million policy, was held by AIG. Remember that? And after we got sued for fraud, the next day they sent us a letter saying, sorry, you're not covered for fraud, which then caused us to have to threaten to sue them, and then they covered us and sort of worked through it. In the end, we settled for $600,000, $625,000. The people that sued us had $3 million, it was a creditors committee, had $3 million that they were trying to get the $3 million and turn it into more than three. They took the $3 million and turned it to $625,000. So bad trade for them, but again, sort of the stress of failure. You fail, you want to be kind of done. And this failure continued on for another 3 or 4 years. There was another sort of foundational thing here, which was the notion of capital structure of a business. So when we're a private company, it was all equity funded, and we had a capital structure that made sense. We did a lot of acquisitions, we used some cash, we used some stock. We went public, we now have a public stock, and the public stock, I think our IPO price was 10, and the highest trade in the stock was $55 a share, something like that. But in that period where the stock was rising aggressively, we did a debt financing. We did a $160 million debt financing that was interest only for 2 years, and then we had to start paying principal back. But theoretically, the debt was going to convert into equity when the stock traded up. And the stock was supposed to trade up, the bankers would say, Merrill Lynch was our bankers, it's going to trade up the next couple of days after you do this, it'll convert to equity, so you want to have this debt. The highest price of our stock was the day before the debt offering priced. So it never converted to debt. And we were a company that was awesome at losing $5 million a month. Like, we really mastered that. Lots of other things we weren't good at, but we were great at losing $5 million a month. And so we had absolutely no business raising debt. And when the internet bubble collapsed and the capital markets fell apart, we literally had no ability to raise additional capital, and that's why we went. So I had never really thought about capital structure at that scale before, and that was a really powerful lesson on that side. On the positive side, a positive example, one that at the time was the fastest growing company I'd ever been involved in was a company called Zynga. And how many of you played Farmville or Mafia Wars? Don't lie. How many of you actually spent money on it? See, this is where people really lie. The company grew, we invested when it was about 10 people, so at the very beginning, and it grew over a 24-month period to about 1,000 people.
Wow.
I think we were, by the end of the second year and the third year, we were doing over $100 million a month in revenue, and we were making $20 or $30 million in income each month. I mean, it was really a spectacular rise in this business. And Farmville was really the big one that sort of pushed it over the top, but there was a bunch of other stuff. We went public. There was some interest in buying the company, about a $10 billion to $15 billion valuation. Never came together. Company went public at a $10 billion market cap, and within a year it had missed its numbers. And today I think the stock trades at $3 or $4 a share, which would be a $3 or $4 billion market cap. So still a valuable company. Lessons from that one, and I don't serve on public company board, so I got off the board before they went public, within a couple weeks before they went public, so the post-public journey wasn't part of it. But there's a really interesting thing that happened. There was the first 1,000 employees were all missionary. Like everybody was on this incredible run. It's 2008, 2009, the financial crisis is going on. And so everybody's miserable except for the people at Zynga. Facebook was having its own success, but it wasn't kind of front and center yet. Everybody's mind was still private. We were still private. At the time that Zynga went public, I think it was the largest IPO since something in 2000. We raised $1 billion in IPO, and the missionary part of this growth was awesome. Like just watching the energy and enthusiasm. The whole thing was a mess, right? When you grow that fast, it's just utter chaos. And so trying to get your arms around this mess was challenging. Mark Pincus, who was the CEO, I think, did a great job of hiring people, sort of moving this mess forward at a very rapid pace. From about 1,000 people to about 2,000 people, almost all the people that joined were mercenary. Because by this point, Zynga was clearly going to be a success. It was going to go public, and the people that joined wanted to join because they wanted to make a bunch of money. They didn't give a shit what Zynga did. They didn't give a shit about what the mission of it was. They didn't really buy into any of that. They just, how many RSUs did I get, and how much is it going to be worth when you go public? And interestingly, I left the board sort of as it was starting to become clear that was the plan. There was a lot of executives hired from places like EA and just didn't have, they knew the gaming industry, but they didn't have passion for the business. And so the big lesson there, and I think that contributed to the stall of the business. Another thing that happened was a big shift from desktop web to mobile. And we were really behind that. There were a couple of other companies that came out with mobile games, and Zynga should have owned the whole mobile gaming category at that point. We just couldn't, it got so big we couldn't sort of do what needed to be done there. And for me, the lesson is, I've been through multiple companies that have grown very quickly and have grown to a large scale, and over and over and over again, my view is that you have to be rigorous about making sure that the people that are in the company as you're scaling the business up are on a mission, and are on the mission of the business, and that's why they're there. And I don't think that stops when you're at 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 5,000 people. And when you're 20 or 50 or 100 people, it's kind of abstract to think about it. But I've seen the same thing happen. Companies get to 100 people, and all of a sudden they're having some success, or the opposite happens, they stall a little, and you can't keep that energy moving in the same way. All of a sudden you realize you have some people that are showing up at work rather than trying to do something amazing with your business. So there's two examples.
So, going back and looking at the late 90s going into that first bubble burst, when you reflect back, how were you emotionally engaging in deals then compared to now?
Yeah, that's a fun question. I sold my first company in 1993 to a public company. I actually had a very deep depression that lasted about 2 years, maybe almost 3 years, sort of in that time frame. I got divorced from my high school girlfriend who I married. I got dropped out of a PhD program, and my business, which was doing well, I got very bored of. And if I look at that emotionally, like my emotions were my identity was so wrapped up in my company. And that first company was called Feld Technology, so like you don't have to be a psychologist to understand what's going on there. And so even selling the company was a really traumatic, not traumatic bad, but sort of an emotionally traumatic experience. I moved to Colorado in 1995 from Boston, and from 1995 to about 2001, I did not separate my worldview into either entrepreneur or investor. I was both. So I co-founded a number of companies, I was chairman or co-chairman of a number of companies, and I had my emotional constitution tied up in both the company and my activity as an investor, and I didn't really separate them. I would also tell you that for any of you that were running companies in that time period that were technology related, that was a completely insane period of time. Because the pace of activity, both in terms of company creation, company scale up, capital markets, exits, and just fundamental change as the internet started to weave itself into our existence, was something that if you're on the front lines of that, funding companies and creating companies and being involved in it, it was an exhausting, emotionally exhausting experience that was relentless. That was then followed by a 12-month incredibly sharp downturn, right? So you had this crazy climb up and then this collapse. And in the midst of a collapse, how many of you ever had a bad day? So by summer of 2001, let's say June, I had this epiphany. And my epiphany was that you have a bad day, you're like, okay, that was a shitty day. Tomorrow I'll go to bed, I'll have a glass of wine, or I'll smoke a joint, which by the way is legal here. Or I'll watch a movie, and I'll go to sleep, and I'll wake up tomorrow and try again. Tomorrow will be better. It's a good positive attitude though. I woke up, I sort of, end of a day, one day in June, and I realized that every day had been worse than the previous day so far that year. And I saw no one in sight. And I shifted my frame of reference. And what I did was I shifted my frame of reference from feeling oppressed to kind of viewing it as a challenge. It's like, let's see what the world will throw at me now. It also caused me to start to emotionally disconnect from the operation of the companies. I still cared about the companies, but I realized I couldn't carry around both. I couldn't be an operator and an investor. It was just too much cognitive and emotional overhead for me. And there may be some people that can do it, but I couldn't. And I made a choice, that I'd be an investor. And as an investor, I don't run anything. I don't manage anyone. Our organization at Foundry is 14 people. Right? It's 6 partners, it's 6 EAs, it's a CFO and a GC, and that's it. But as an investor, we own a big chunk of Techstars, and I'm a board member. And Techstars is a 250-person operating company that's now very large and growing very quickly. As a co-founder, I have some moral authority, but you'll note that I call myself a co-founder, not a co-chairman or chairman. Like, I didn't want the functional responsibility of that. What I wanted to do was support the CEO and the founders. And I have a very simple view of supporting the CEO. And I say founders not as a footnote. A lot of times one of the founders is the CEO, but a lot of times it's not. And so I sort of view that as a collective where my job is to support that group. As long as I support the CEO, I work for her. And everybody needs something different. So I don't have a singular archetype that I execute. I have to conform to whatever she needs. If I hit a point where I don't support her anymore, it's my job to do something about it, which does not mean fire her. It means work hard to get back to a place where I support her. And we make CEO changes every now and then. I've had to fire CEOs, and it's never fun, but it's part of the experience of being an investor in growing companies. But sort of that mind shift in my role was important. And I think it's a really valuable one also for entrepreneurs and for CEOs as they scale their business. Sort of the analogous dynamic if you're scaling your business would be the idea of working in your business versus working on your business. And for me as an investor, but also as a chairman, I was working in these businesses while I was working on these businesses, while I was trying to support whoever the leadership was, while I was in this weird proxy role as chairman or co-chairman, as being sort of the leader that it was too much.
Yes.
And so, especially as I've gotten older, like understanding where I fit in the world based on what I'm good at, but more importantly, what I like to do. That linkage became very important to me, and I think today versus 20 years ago, like that's the most profound shift for me.
Makes sense. I'm sure a lot of us, many of us have been in the same place where our business becomes our identity, the highs become highs, the lows become lows, and it's emotionally a roller coaster.
I still have shitty days, and when companies fail, it still sucks. And when I have a fun Fitbit story, we were the early investors in Fitbit, and there's, again, I get off the board before they're a public company, so it's still a private company, but growing incredibly fast. And we released a product called the Fitbit Force. And when we released the product, it was an incredibly successful product launch. I think we sold 750,000 of them in 60 days. And we started to get reports of skin irritation. And it turned out that I ended up having one of the 3 times in my professional career where I've thrown up in a trash can, during or after a meeting. And this was one of them because we didn't know what was going on. We had this conference call of the board, which then we had conference calls every night at 6 p.m. Pacific for 90 days. Sometimes they lasted a minute, sometimes they lasted a couple hours as we tried to work through, what was a life-threatening thing for the company. And there was a hypothesis that the band might have radioactive material in it. And, when you think about it from the standpoint of being a health and fitness product, right? I threw up after that meeting. And it turns out that there was no radioactive material in the thing, but like you still have an emotional connection that's really deep, and that emotional connection was, in that moment, was about, oh my God, have we created something that's really horrifying? And you get through that, and you're still like, okay, I still got this huge problem that I got to fix in front of me. And you, as investors, you personalize that. In this particular company case, and it's a good instructive lesson for me, the CEO, James, was just incredibly calm through all of it, or internalized his own stress. It probably wasn't calm, but he managed it in a very sort of let us solve the problem way. There's only one time where he says to me, hey Brad, usually I can see my way out of any problem, I'm having trouble seeing my way out of this. And eventually it appeared. Like having that kind of a relationship emotionally with the leader of the company versus him, I can't share how I'm feeling with my board member, I can't be vulnerable in this moment. Like all of those things allow it to be much more real.
Yeah.
In a good way.
Yeah. Wow, makes sense. So this morning, Vern is not here, is he? No, shoot. I was hoping he'd still be able to stay here. But this morning, he had some really wonderful insights, but one of them was counsel to us. In EO, we're not supposed to give advice, but this was counsel from Vern, is treat startup company as investments as donations. We have a lot of very experienced investors in this room. We have some emerging investors. We have new investors. We have entrepreneurs who want to become investors. What is one of the biggest reoccurring mistakes that you see from emerging investors?
Well, I didn't hear how Vern said it, but I hope he said it in a thoughtful and constructive way. The way I describe it to people, when I started making angel investments, I made 40 angel investments between 1994 and 1996. So I sold my first company in 1993. I made a couple $1 million. I essentially, other than buying a house, I put almost all of that money back into these 40 companies, $25,000 to $50,000 at a time. And when I made these investments, I expected that I would have an economic return, but I had no idea where the economic return would be related to. And I had a downside case, and my downside case was I knew I could start another company and go make a business again. So if I blew the $2 million that I made, so what? When you're investing in things that you know about, and as an individual investor, I think that you should have what I call a high velocity strategy. I think it's really dangerous to invest in one company and hope that's the one that's going to work. And again, I was investing in about a company a month for 3 years. I'm not sure that's the pace that I would recommend for people, but it's a situation where you're building a portfolio of private investments, and you need a strategy. So my strategy was invest the same dollar amount in every single company. So I always wrote a $25,000 check because I kind of did the math of, I'm going to have about 40 or so companies in the portfolio over the next couple of years. And then occasionally, depending on how the company was doing, I doubled down to another $25,000. And it turns out that pretty quickly, you have a couple companies that fail. They fail before they succeed. So pretty quickly you get comfortable, or you have to get comfortable with the idea that your investment can go to zero. The other thing that I learned, and I probably learned it in year 3, maybe 1997 is when this happened. I had a company that returned more than 100 times my money. Right? So the $25,000 I put in came back was worth $3 or $4 million. I don't remember the exact number. And when that happened, all of a sudden I understood the difference between 0 times my money and 100 times my money. And when you're investing as an angel investor early stage, you're actually playing for 100 times your money. Now, I've had lots of investments that, I got my money back, or I got 2 times my money, or 3 times my money, or 5. Those are good. Like, all good, better than 0. But what you're trying to do as an investor, especially at the early stage, is invest in things that have very high potential outcomes, disconnected from, again, domains that you know, but disconnected from your business. I then categorize 2 other kinds of investments that I've made over time. And these are investments that either are in friends' companies that I don't think are high potential outcomes, but I just want to be supportive of a friend.
Right.
I probably have 1 or 2 times where something like that turned out to be. I can think of one specifically. I tossed some money into a company called Nutrisystems, an entrepreneur that I had funded that had failed. His first company succeeded, I made a little bit of money. Second company failed. He then did a recapitalization of this company, Nutrisystems. They kept it public. It was basically a take private and relaunched. I put $50,000 or something in, and I had no expectation it was going to be anything. It ended up being worth 50-something times money. So, that would be a case where I put it in to support my friend versus that. And then the last is the thing that you just want to see exist. Right, you're putting some money in a local restaurant behind somebody that you know, or you're investing in a business again that you just want it to exist in the world. You want to purchase an art gallery, something like that. And that second category, the second and third types versus the first, I call for-profit philanthropy, because the dynamics is exactly the same as a philanthropic contribution. Right, if you lose your money, you just take a tax write-off. If you give it philanthropically, you take a tax write-off. And it changes the thought process when you separate, at least for me, when I separate into those 2 categories. Where when I'm investing with where I'm return seeking, it's not that my selection criteria is different, but my lens is different. When I'm doing it with no expectation of an outcome, it doesn't change the goal dynamics with the person I'm investing in, but it takes the pressure off the relationship. It kind of sucks to put money in a friend's company, have it fail, and lose the friendship. So, I think that's really important. When I was in MyEO, I don't know if this is true in EO, but when I was in MyEO, you actually weren't allowed to pitch your fellow members your business. And there was informal business activity, and there was some investing activity that happened, and people partnered up on stuff, but you couldn't pitch it. And that was instructive to me because I valued my friendships with my peer group more than I valued the return. And it doesn't mean that I'm not friends with the people that I invest in, but it forced me to sort of separate those 2 things. So that would be my longer version of what I'm guessing Bert said to you this morning. And the last comment I make, if you're making angel investments, I wrote a blog post a while ago on Feld.com. I think if you just type angel investment strategy, it comes up at the top of the list. And I walk through my strategy for doing angel investments with this, what I again describe as a high velocity And my assertion, I'll just end with this, my assertion is not that you have to follow that model. Instead, I would assert you have to have a strategy. And I see so many people invest in stuff with no strategy. And what they find is, you have $500,000 of your own money invested in this thing that's going nowhere with somebody that you kept piling money in on, and that was like the thing you bet on. And you had all these other things that you could have done and you didn't do because you allocated all your money to this. And you did it because you didn't step back and say, what do I want it to look like 5 years from now? By the way, in the same way you think about your business. And so be deliberate about it.
Right. Yeah, and Vern was certainly being playful and thoughtful. Thoughtful in the sense that he knows entrepreneurs and he knows the entrepreneurial spirit in MyEO, where we get emotionally tied to the upside and the potential to our friends, the potential to pitch all the wonderful things it's going to do. And his warning was certainly, beware that potential, beware that entrepreneurial spirit that is innate to us, especially in MyEO.
Well, the irony, right? Vern raised money from a bunch of other EOers initially for gazelles that supported him and people that knew him, and as an entrepreneur, your most likely source of that early capital is friends and family, people who already know you, people who have a network, and it's a very powerful thing in the context of EO.
Sure.
And it's not taking the emotion out of it; it's be clear about what you're trying to get as the goal and the outcome.
Got it. Well, let's, can we get our blue box up here and let's take some questions from you guys.
I'm afraid one of the blue boxes is one of those things you throw at people.
Yeah, so that's new for me, Brad. It's kind of the first time I've ever seen
I
it.
didn't know it was called a blue box.
I don't think it is.
Oh, like a box.
Yeah.
Hash box. What's it called? Catch box. Yeah.
Clever. There we go. Right to your right. That's part of the fun. You get it.
Oh, I know. It's way better than walking up and down with a microphone. The person asks the question, the microphone gets them, and the finish testing.
Right.
I'm Frank from Germany, and work for Goals all the day.
Frank, put it closer to your mouth.
Is it better now?
Better, yeah.
I'm Frank from Germany, and Goal is a little bit like the startup capital of Europe, so there are so many startups. We are the youngest EO chapter, I think, worldwide, all startup people. And sometimes I have the feeling that, especially venture capitalists, are like lemmings. They're all running into the same direction. It may be clean tech, it may be e-commerce, it may be fintech, it may be insurance tech, and whatever tech. So, what is the next direction for the lemming industry?
I don't care because I like to think that whatever everybody else is doing, they can do, and we're going to figure out what we want to do. I want to make a couple comments. One, the generalized observation is valid, is that there's an awful lot of following behavior within venture capital investing. But I calibrate it by, I think a mistake a lot of people make is that they view venture capitalists as a singular archetype. And I encourage people to think of venture capitalists as Dungeons and Dragons characters. And if you don't know Dungeons and Dragons, then Lord of the Rings characters. Right? You've got some elves, and you've got some magicians, and you've got some wizards, and you've got some orcs, and you've got some dwarves, and you've got some trolls. And most venture firms are collections of these different archetypes with different experiences. As a founder, looking for investors that share your vision and that are actually able to help your company versus viewing it as a singular archetype of just money is a really useful frame of reference, especially today where I think there's something like 500 early stage venture funds that have been created in the last 3 or 4 years. It's ridiculous. Maybe there's 1,000. And the ability for those firms to actually differentiate themselves on anything other than the individual people and those people's experience involvement is very low. So recognize that there is a lot of follower behavior, but that there are lots of differences between the individuals and firms. If you look at technology investing and venture capital investing, there are endless waves, I like to say, of word of the year or phrase of the year. Anybody remember when everything was big data? I gave a talk at some conference, and the headline, I was the keynote for something that was a big data conference, and I was the first speaker in my, I didn't give him the title in advance. It was something like, Brad Feld talks about big data was the thing in the program. And my slide, first slide, only slide, was big data is bullshit. As people walk into the room, and that's the slide. And I said, look, here's the deal. Like the stuff we call big data today, in 20 years, we're going to refer to as microscopic data. Like this idea of the data is becoming more important is a truth. It's not an investing theme. Today, the word of the year last year was machine learning and AI, and so you couldn't go anywhere. I get pitches for businesses. We are a business that makes drapes using machine learning and AI. And I'm like, what the fuck, seriously? And it was ambulance. And if you know anything about the technology, machine learning is actually a contemporary evolution of something in the 1980s, which was called expert systems and neural networks. And in very sort of interesting twist of fate is that those technologies people felt were dead ends. And so there's a relatively small number of people who were continuing to invest in that. And part of the problem was there wasn't enough processing power to actually execute those at any scale that was useful. And the processing power over the last 30 years has been a geometric curve. And all of a sudden the theory behind it started to be relevant and people started doing what's now called machine learning. And it's very powerful, but is it an investable thesis? No, it's a horizontal component of all technology. So one of the mistakes as an entrepreneur is to constantly be jumping from word of the year to word of the year. And if you go back to the conversation I said about Zynga, like, what is the mission you're on? What were you as a founders put on planet Earth to do? And try to do that independent of whatever the trendy things are. Interestingly, if you do that, you'll likely find better investors. Because the investors won't be chasing some trendy thing. The investors will be reacting to the thing that you're actually creating. And when somebody says, what's the next thing to me, my specific answer is I don't care, because we're investing in areas that we think have 30-year time horizons. And I fundamentally think the machines have already taken over. I think they're just super patient. They're letting us put all the data into them. Really long duty cycles. They're all connected to each other.
They're working us.
They're training us very, very patiently.
Based on the theme of this conference, which of your 6 books would you recommend to us and why?
Sure.
Good question.
Probably the most relevant book is a book called Venture Deals, which was the second book I wrote. It's in its 3rd edition. It came out of a series of blog posts I wrote in 2004 and 2005 with one of my partners, a guy named Jason Nelson, where the blog posts were us deconstructing a typical term sheet. And that represents about 10% of the book. So the book really is, a section about here's what a typical term sheet is and what terms matter and how to think about it. We break it down into the idea of there's only really 2 things that matter, economics and control versus all this legalese, and how do you think through that. But we then talk about the landscape of equity investing as well as convertible debt investing, some tactical stuff, but also some contextual stuff. We have a section on how venture capital firms function and how VCs get paid and make money, to understand alignment of incentives. We have a section on negotiation, and a couple more things. So that book, Venture Deals, I think is probably the most relevant, even if you're not doing traditional venture capital type investing, but if you're doing any sort of equity investing, whether it's at the angel stage or later, or getting involved, giving or receiving, it's very helpful in terms of contextualizing the landscape. The other book I wrote that I think is probably most helpful, which is a little bit tangential to what I think this conference is, but I think is very relevant in the context of EO and groups like this, is a book called Startup Communities. That book was written on the premise that you can build a startup community anywhere in the world, that there's at least 100,000 people in the city. And when I wrote the book in 2012, the phrase startup communities have never been used before. People call them entrepreneurial ecosystems or research clusters or innovation something or others. And what I tried to do is come up with a very clear thesis, which I call the Boulder thesis, for how to create a startup community anywhere in the world. And the four principles quickly is that the leaders have to be entrepreneurs. So not government, not university, not nonprofits. They're all in a category I call feeders that are an important part of the startup community, but if you don't have entrepreneurs leading it, it goes nowhere. Second, you have to take a long-term view, at least 20 years, so really plan long-term. Third is that you have to be inclusive of anyone who wants to engage in any way, and it's interesting, in 2012, the whole notion of diversity and inclusion wasn't front and center, especially in entrepreneurship, and I didn't think of it that way when I said inclusive, but it's nice that it sort of maps to that, because my view was that anybody who wants to participate, you want to make it easy for them to be able to get involved and participate. And then the last is that you have to have activities and events that continually engage people in entrepreneurship versus just talking about it. And so that would be the other book I'd recommend, because I think it's really useful both as you build out something like, the MyEO network, but it's also useful when you think about the entrepreneurial activity in whatever your city is, and how you can be a leader in amplifying that entrepreneurial activity in your startup community, and how that can be self-reflected back on what's working for your business or not.
Good. Michael.
Hey, Brad, Mike Byrne. This doesn't sound like this box, but I had a three-part question last year. But basically, I was curious how your group of Foundry figures out what you're going to be investing in as things change over the flow. I know you're an entrepreneur, how you figure it out. And then what's your current appetite? What are you guys looking at now? And then I guess the third part of the question, who do you love to invest with, other VCs or angels, to really interject you guys to work with?
Sure. So our strategy follows, we have a filter that allows us to say no to everything in under 60 seconds. And so that's our goal. Our goal is to say no immediately. Because what you're working on doesn't fit through our filter. And the filter is a set of themes. If you're interested in the themes, go to foundrygroup.com/themes and you can read about them. They tend to be abstract and horizontal. And they while they evolve, they don't really change, right? There's a theme that could last for 30 years. Human-computer interaction is an example of a theme. The way that humans and computers interact is changing over the next 30 years. Protocol is a theme, so companies built around technology protocols like SMTP, which is the protocol that underlies email. And for anybody that thinks email is dead, we were an investor in a company called SendGrid that went public last year and just got bought last week by a company called Twilio for $2 billion. It's a Denver-based company. So that email's not dead, it's still being used. I think each of you guys use email, right? Yeah, okay. Just check. So we have a set of themes. That's one filter. So if you're not in a theme, we say no immediately. We have a geographic filter, US and Canada. If you're outside the US and Canada, we say no immediately. And we primarily engage at the early stage. We do every now and then a later stage investment, but typically if you've raised more than $5 million, you're too late for us. But we don't have to be the first money in a company. So we're perfectly happy if the company's raised $2 or $3 million, $5 million. So if you get through that filter, we then focus on three things. Now remember, we have these themes, so we know you'll never hear us ask a question like, what's the total available market? Which, by the way, is a stupid fucking question for somebody to ask as a venture investor, but it seems to be one of the favorite things for VCs to ask entrepreneurs. A lot of the stuff that we're investing in at the early stage, the total available market is either infinite or zero, right? It's either just so big it doesn't matter, or it's not going to materialize, right? So we don't ask what's your business model, because we probably know the different business models for these things better than most entrepreneurs do anyway. Not because we're arrogant, just because we're investing across them. So what we're focused on instead are three things. The first is, do we have affinity for your product? Do we care about what you do? We don't have to be daily users of it. we have to have affinity for it. And the reason for that is we have invested over the years in so many things that we don't care about that we don't want to do it anymore. When everything's going great, you know, it doesn't matter what you've invested in, it's great, everything's going great. But when it gets hard, and it always gets hard, no matter how successful the business is, if we don't have affinity for the product, it's really hard to stay engaged at the level that you need to stay engaged to work through the hard part. So affinity is first. Second, were the founders put on this planet to do this thing? So are you obsessed about what you're doing? And we use the word obsessed very deliberately. We don't use the word passionate or passion. It's super easy to fake passion, especially in the context of entrepreneurship. If you're an extrovert, you can be passionate about pretty much anything. And if you're an introvert, you can be passionate about pretty much nothing. Right? And it's not canonically true, it's generally true. And so, like, enthusiasm is so different than obsession. And having looked for obsession in people and having experienced it and having misjudged it, you know, over many years now, it's pretty easy to tell within the first 15 or 30 minutes whether we feel like the founders are obsessed about this or this is just a thing they're working on. And then the third characteristic for us is, do the founders want us to be investors as badly as we want to be investors? So it has to be bidirectional. We really have to want to be investors based on what you're doing and how you're doing it, but you also have to really want us to be your investors. So that's how we look at things. In terms of the type of investments that we make, most early stage investments are anywhere from $1 million to $10 million is the first check, and sort of over the life of the company, $10 to $15 million is typically what we'll invest from the early stage activity. In 2013, we raised what we call an early growth fund. So it's really a Series B, Series C fund. It's initially for our own portfolio. And it allowed us to invest, our own existing investments, allowed us to invest $30 to $40 million over the life of a company. In 2016, we raised an early stage fund and then a growth fund, of which 30% of it was aimed at other venture funds. So we invest 30% of our capital in other early stage venture funds. We have about 27 of them that we've invested in. Mostly seed funds, a few of them hard to access funds that we've had long-term relationships with. And I would say that the amount of seed investing that we're doing has gone down a lot, where maybe we do one a year that's a seed investment, where it's really first money in. Because the majority of our early stage investments are typically after a company has raised that, that first $1 million to $3 million. And because of the funds, we just recently closed a $750 million fund. Again, 30% of the capital goes to existing fund, the partner funds and other venture funds. We can invest $40 to $50 million in a company. That would be the most we'd invest of our own money in a company. Obviously, we'd syndicate with others. And if you look across the landscape, our strategy over time has been to continue to build more ownership in companies that are working. So when Segment went public, we owned almost 30% of them. When Fitbit went public, we owned right at 30% of the company, which is a lot more than a typical early stage VC will own. And so that's been part of our strategy as well. We have a part of our strategy that we call syndication agnostic, which is we're happy to partner with other venture firms, but we're also happy to do things by ourselves. And we will lead subsequent rounds by ourselves without new investors, and we'll also lead subsequent rounds at increased price without needing new investors. So we're not looking for another co-investor to validate our decisions, and sort of our premise is we know the company's better than anybody else does. And so really the issue is we have to have our own internal process to not bullshit ourselves about how the companies are doing and keep putting money into something because you hope someday it'll work. And we've worked really hard within our partnership to have critical thinking around every company. We're all equal partners. We're all involved across the entire portfolio. So it's not like this is my deal and this is your deal. And as a result, there's not a lot of the sort of normal protective activity or the capital allocation problem that you often have when you've got conflict between partners that aren't looking at the portfolio. People we like to work with, if if you look at our partner funds, which again, Foundry Group, there's a list of them. I mean, those would be the highest on the list. But there are firms like Union Square Ventures and True Ventures, Uncork, which used to be Softtech in the Bay Area, a company called K9 in the Bay Area, Founder Collective, Techstars. I think of the 100 or so companies we've invested in, about 15 of them have gone through Techstars. And at later stages, I would say we end up with two-step functions. The first is that sort of Series B, Series C, which is a small group of firms that tend to work with us, including some of our investors. And then the very late stage, sort of pre-IPO, it tends to be a different category, of which I would say we don't have super deep relationships where we're proactively chasing them. Those companies tend to be chasing the companies that are on that path. And so, we're invested in a company called Rover in Seattle. That's started off as a dog food marketplace. It's become a very large company. T. Rowe Price recently led a financing. That's the pre-IPO round, right? So, you get into those kinds of things. Last comment to make on this, we've tried really hard to limit in a constructive way the number of co-investing partners we have, rather than be super promiscuous. And the reason for that is when things are going well, having, whoever your partners are probably don't matter. We approach it from the standpoint of believing that things are not going to always go well. And, we have lots of cases where the partners that you had sitting around the table with you at the moment when something went wrong really mattered. The alignment between us and them, their cultural alignment with founders, how they thought about the people operating the business. Having alignment on that, I'm sorry I don't use the word alignment, but having alignment really mattered versus other situations that I've been in, and I had this at the previous firm, which was a spinoff from SoftBank called Mobius, where we had, go down the list of all the major VCs, and we had co-investments with all of them. And you sort of get to this place where a lot of the behavior is utterly random. Right? You run into a problem, you just have a really hard time figuring out what's going to happen next based on other people, rather than something that is either under your control or with people who are behaving in predictable ways because you've got a long relationship with them. We like the long relationship, predictable way model versus the, this could be interesting, which usually is euphemism for this is going to suck.
Turns out.
I think I answered all three of the questions.
Those are great. I was wondering if there's one person you really love to invest.
One person, I have super close friends in the investment world. I love investing with Fred Wilson at USV. I love investing with Greg Sands at Costanoa. I love investing with Jeff Clavier at Softtech.
Simon, EOPC.
I love investing with Greg Gottesman, who used to be at Madrona, who's now at Pioneer Square Labs, which we're investors in. Right, so, go ahead. Sorry.
Why do you restrict yourself to the US and Canada?
In 2000, I was on the board of 7 non-US companies. 6 of them in Europe, Central Europe, and the UK. I don't remember the exact distribution. And then one that was headquartered in Hong Kong that covered sort of Southeast Asia. So in addition to being on way too many other boards, I was also on the boards of these 7 companies. And in the end, I got a 0 on 6 of them. And I got half my money back on one of them. And the only reason I got half my money back on one of them was that we had signed a licensing deal with the Body Shop, if you remember the perfume company, or the body, whatever they sold. I have no idea why I was involved in a company like that, because I'm not ever sure I've met a thing of deodorant I've liked. Laugh, that's funny. We, as part of, we did a .com spinoff with them, a separate company, and as part of that, we did a licensing agreement with them for the Body Shop name. And they wanted the licensing agreement to be for like a year. And we wanted it to be in perpetuity, because that was the value of doing it. And we settled on 35 years, because I was 30 at the time. And I figured that when I was, maybe it was 34 years, I was 31 at the time, because when I was 65, I'd be done, I wouldn't care anymore. And they wanted to, when this thing failed, they wanted to get out of that agreement, and so they paid us back half the money to get out of it. So, a couple of things. One is I sucked at it. I learned a lot about French and German law and about doing business in France and Germany and the UK. I would say that as an investor, the cultural norms and the investing dynamics and the networks, I was not at all additive to. They were foreign to me. The time zone dynamics were exhausting against the backdrop of everything else, just to be able to be in the communication flow. The physical geography dynamics when I wanted to be in person were really hard. And when we started Foundry, we just looked at it and said, there's so much opportunity in front of us for, again, we're a limited team. We didn't want to, we have one office in Boulder, Colorado. We don't have an office in, London or, Paris or something like that. So it was a series of things based on this experience of just being crummy. We have a lot of companies that have, are worldwide companies. So we're not at all uncomfortable with that. A company here locally, Full Contact in Denver, that has, headquarters here, has an office in Latvia, in Riga, has an office in Israel, and has an office in a small town in India that I can never remember the name of. And I think the majority of, more than 50% of their employees are not US based. We have other large companies like ReturnPath, which is based in New York, that probably has 20 offices around the world. We have an increasingly large number of companies that have very significant non-US engineering operations. For some reason, we had a handful of companies all gravitate towards Minsk. And there's a very strong technical community in Minsk that is satellite offices for US-based companies. So we're very comfortable with that. And then through Techstars is global. So, of the 40 accelerators that exist today, I think not quite half of them are outside the US. And then Startup Weekend and Startup Week, which Techstars also runs, is global. So indirectly, we have huge amounts of activity all around the world. But as direct investors, we just decided it was too hard for us to be good at that. And I think one of the things that a lot of investors, it's a good example of the to-do list and the not-to-do list, right? All of us have our to-do list, but not very many of us have a not-to-do list. And the not-to-do list is actually more powerful in a lot of cases than the to-do list, because there's a finite amount of stuff to do. And that's why we chose.
Brad, real quickly, could you just outline for those in the audience that don't know what Techstars is, can you just give us a quick outline? What is Techstars? What is the Techstars program? How does it work?
We started Techstars in 2006. It was the first mentor-driven accelerator. It was the second accelerator that was created. So the accelerator model was pioneered in 2005 by an organization called Y Combinator. It was a new type of approach to funding companies. With Techstars, what we did was we extended the idea and made pieces of it completely unique in terms of running. And then the two organizations have grown very differently. I like to say they've scaled vertically, where they have very, very large programs, 100 companies per program in the Bay Area. We have scaled horizontally, so we have 40 programs happening each year around the world with 10 companies per program. So the first program that we did in Boulder in 2006, we started in 2006, we first program in 2007. We had 10 companies, about 30 entrepreneurs in a physical location in Boulder for 90 days, so a 3-month program. We surrounded them with about 50 mentors who were mostly experienced entrepreneurs, a lot of friends of mine, not just Boulder-based people, but plenty of entrepreneurs from around the country. We didn't have an academic curriculum, But we, over time, developed a rhythm and a structure week by week, month by month. And it culminates in something we call a demo day, which is less a fundraising event and more sort of a coming out event, sort of a marker in time for these companies. We fund the companies with a modest amount of money, enough money to be interesting for them. It's roughly $120,000. We take equity in the company in exchange for that. If the companies are looking at the investment we're making as their valuation, they shouldn't apply to Techstars. The value of Techstars is a combination of this intense 90-day program, the mentor activity, and the network that comes from it. From that start, we did the program in Boulder for 2 years, and then we started to expand geographically. We expanded to other cities, and we had networks in Boston first, Seattle next, then New York. And it was pretty remarkable. The notion of an accelerator became a category. And so I'm sure probably every city that y'all are in, there's an accelerator. And it's a really powerful way to help companies, not necessarily first-time entrepreneurs, in a very concentrated way, get a couple of years worth of that activity shoved into a 90-day period. So it's accelerator. It's also a way as an entrepreneur, whether you're a first-time entrepreneur or not, to really engage in a network that in Techstars' case now is a global network that's very large of both mentors, investors, and entrepreneurs. It's also a way to get exposure to lots of mentors. Again, when that mentor network, I think Techstars has 4,000 or 5,000 mentors in the mentor network, similar that you get from your peer mentors in EO, but in this particular context, those mentors in a lot of cases are people that as an entrepreneur you wouldn't have access to because of wherever they are. And then the mentors themselves get a lot of connectivity to each other. So they say, well, what's the benefit for the mentor? And a lot of the benefit for the mentor is not just the learning and the experience of participating in a network like this, but also having that tighter connection to lots of other mentors.
Right.
And today we have, as I said, 40 programs. Next, in 2019, we'll run, I think it's, we'll run 50 programs-ish. Might be a couple more than that. About 2/3 of them will be with corporate partners, so they'll be themed around particular things in conjunction with a corporate partner. For example, we do some fintech accelerators with Barclays, so the 10 companies that are in the accelerator are all fintech related, and Barclays is our partner for that. We have an Alexa accelerator in Seattle with Amazon, so if you're building a company that's built on top of the Alexa ecosystem, like it's a totally logical place to participate. We also have a Seattle accelerator, Techstars Seattle, so if you're an entrepreneur in the Pacific Northwest or you want to get to the Pacific Northwest, it's a particularly good way to do that. The organization itself is about a 250-person company now, and it's largely self-funded. It's a business that has been both cash flow positive on an operating basis, but also has now generated a huge amount of equity value because of the investments that we make in the companies. And I don't see a natural governor for it in terms of scale. Like, the ability to grow from 50 accelerators a year to 50 accelerators a year doesn't feel like a constraint. We're now starting to roll out a number of other products, some of which are already across the system, like as I described, Startup Week or Startup Weekend, but many of them, now that we have entrepreneurs who have built sizable businesses, had exits, we have a very large talent network, both across the entrepreneurs, but also the employees that have gone through multiple companies. And so sort of doing a better job of organizing a lot of those, I would say, assets that have come from the activity we've done into products that we can then deploy across the whole network.
Super cool. Yeah, it's an amazing program.
And the best part is I don't run any of it. Right? Those two guys, David Cohen and David Brown, are the co-CEOs, and they run it. But some of you may know the fourth co-founder, Benny Jared Polis, who is running for governor of Colorado right now, but was our congressman for the last decade, and was a super successful entrepreneur in Boulder. Did BlueMountainArts.com, the greeting card company in the 90s. That got bought for $1 zillion. And then did a company called Pro Flowers, which turned into a Provide Commerce, which Liberty bought for $500 million. And Jared and I have been friends for a long time. He's one of the first guys I met when I moved to Boulder. So it's kind of fun to, he was at MyEO very early on, we're informed, like fun to sort of watch the evolution of these relationships over a long period of time.
Yeah, pretty
And
cool.
have them get instantiated in something like this.
Noah, back to you.
I'm a value investor, so price is like a big determinant of every investment I look at, and I wonder how important price is to me.
Price is meaningful. I would say we pay attention to price, and most importantly, we don't chase deals. So there's a lot of deals that we don't do because the price gets bid up and it gets outside the zone that we think is rational. And in some cases, that was a mistake we didn't do it because they're successful. In other cases, it wasn't a mistake that we didn't do it. We have a constrained number of investments we can do each year. We do about 10 new investments a year at most. And so I would say it's a medium factor, right? Like we know the zones that are comfortable for different stages of companies. And we don't have to be the low price investor, but once it gets above some level, it becomes irrational. The other thing, and I go back to the early stages, knowing the difference between 0 times your money and 100 times your money. I think our entry price on Fitbit was $20-something million on a post basis. I don't remember the exact number. Let's say 25 million post. And when it went public, I think our average exit value for Fitbit is around $3 billion. Right? Didn't matter whether we got it at 25, 21, or 29, not at all. Right? So but if we got it at 200, that would have been a difference. And so we're thinking about it from that perspective. Also, because we're investing early, most of the companies that we have, it's very hard to do about sort of a classical value equation. They're not even positive companies. They don't have any sort of terminal multiple that you can do anything about. I like to say in my business, the only reason you do a spreadsheet is read-only because people send you shit in spreadsheets and you have to look at it. But if you kind of can't do the math in your head on that range, something's wrong. One of the things that we do find important, though, are the term characteristics, especially as companies get more mature, and making sure that you don't get misalignment between series of investors. And so in some ways, that's even more important to us than price. Because once you have investors that have very different return characteristics based on where they invest, especially if the math is such that we make the same amount of money when the company exits at 100, from between 100 and $200 million, we make the same amount of money based on the financing stuff. That's a shitty place to be. All right, so we try to make sure that we don't let ourselves get into deal structures that are complex and that are misaligned between investors.
We have time for one more question from the audience.
What are your thoughts about a coming recession or depression, and how will you act when we see that happen? How will you change your investment?
I have no idea. I don't pay much attention to, I don't play the public markets and I don't pay much attention to the macro because I can't affect it. I've invested through 4 cycles now, and as an entrepreneur, if you include my entrepreneur activity in 1987, I was in Boston, and for those of you that know Boston in the late 80s, there was this thing called the Massachusetts Miracle that everybody was talking about. Michael Dukakis had created this incredible Massachusetts Miracle, and after the stock market crash in 1987, it all just disappeared. And it was an illusion. Like, there was a massive recession in Boston between 88 and 1990, and I was running my first business then. And I really didn't know it. Like, I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know enough to know it. So I'm a big believer that you can create successful companies through any economic cycle. There are real positives and real negatives when you're in the steep up part of the cycle. There's no question that we're in a steep up part of the cycle right now, especially around entrepreneurship. I mean, when things are incredibly trendy, everything flocks to it. And, the positives are that lots of things are easier. The negatives are everything's more expensive. It's harder to hire people. everybody raises too much money, so, if you raise too much money, you spend it indiscriminately. Oh, I have the money, I'm gonna spend. I've never met anybody that does a good job when they have excess money from a financing to really manage it the way they used to manage it before. It always sort of it creeps a little bit or a lot. When things are on the down part of the cycle, space is cheaper because it's empty. People are looking for jobs, so the employment characteristics are more in your favor. But then the negatives are it's harder to get customers, and people aren't spending as much money on things, and there's a lot of exogenous stress in the system. So I operate from the frame of reference that we go through cycles continuously, and that a lot of the cycles are ones that not everyone is experiencing at the same time. So for example, right now, if you're in urban America in technology, you think the world is fucking awesome. And if you're in non-urban America, pick your rural city, where there was either a single company town or a mining town or agriculture, and all the young people have moved away because there's no opportunities, and you're in a town that's dying. Your view is things suck. And so the cycles may not be all calibrated with each other. They're behaving in different ways. The other thing that happens in the global financial crisis is such a good example of this. 2007 to 2009 was really brutal from a macroeconomic perspective and really challenging from a structural perspective, right? I view it as the moment in time where networks became more important than hierarchies, because the hierarchies, which have been the sort of canonical structure in society, and especially in business, really didn't function well through the global financial crisis, and networks functioned pretty well. And so sort of emergent out of it, the value of the network increased significantly. If you flip it around, there's some amazing companies created between 2006 and 2010. An enormous amount of innovation and technology development during that time frame that far outpaced any sort of economic activity between 2010 and 2014 as we had whatever recovery had. So it's not that it's a big macro cycle that we're all victims of. I mean, I had this little tiny company in Boston in the middle of a recession. I still found people to pay me, to do stuff, because the stuff we did was hard, and people needed it, they valued it, and their businesses were still moving. So that's my answer to what do I think about it. My advice is, to the extent that you can, turn the dials down on the stuff that doesn't matter. The volume on the dials as low as you can get them. And a lot of people can't turn it to zero, right? You have to be pretty disciplined or pretty savant-like, but you can turn them down to 2 or 3. You don't have to be on 10 all the time. And make sure that the dials, the volume that matters, you turn that volume up. And, if you're running a business and what's happening in Washington on a daily basis has no impact on your business, right? Do yourself a favor and on a daily basis, don't watch Fox News and don't watch CNN. I don't care what your religious or political proclivities are. It's religious. Politics is just another form of religion, as far as I'm concerned. If you've read *Sapiens*, then how many people here have read *Sapiens*? Then you understand where that comment comes from. It doesn't mean that you should be ignorant of the news. It shouldn't mean that you become outraged when something happens that's completely offensive to what your value system is. But turn the dial down, because there's so much noise now in the system that it causes us to overreact to the stimuli. And, for the people in the room, there's enough of them that are in their, 40s and 50s. You used to get it once a day with a newspaper. And that's about it. You didn't get it every 7 minutes when you checked your Twitter feed or checked Facebook. And it's really hard to concentrate on doing something that's hard, that you're trying to build that's durable, when those volumes are turned up too much. So sort of figure out how to modulate them in a way that's satisfying to you. And I think the end result of that is the cycles will have less impact on you, because all the emotional noise about what's happening won't have as much impact on you, and that'll allow you to think more clearly about what you have to do in the context of your business.
Good question. So, final question here. This one's important for you guys out there. We have, Brad, as I mentioned, we have a shark, angel shark experience tomorrow. We're very, very excited about it.
Do the angels turn the sharks into nice things, or do the sharks eat the angels?
Well, it's really at the global.
Somebody have an angel fish tank?
Exactly. So we have the angel shark experience. We have 15 pitch candidates here in this audience. Can you raise your hand if you're going to be one of our contestants tomorrow? Okay, so we have 15 contestants. Now, Brad is one of the leading North American investor venture capital entrepreneurs in North America. It's true. He's seen probably more pitches, thousands. You can even guess, I bet, tens of thousands of pitches. You've seen pitches and you've already made up your mind in 3 seconds, maybe 60, maybe 3 minutes. For our 15 candidates that are going before our angel sharks tomorrow, what are the best practices that you can leave them with? This is where they should be taking notes, so that they still have 12 more hours to fine-tune their pitches to catch our angel sharks' attention.
I'll give you what I think is the most important, which is you have 60 seconds to get me where the dial is either in the green or the red. Right? Green being interested, red being not interested. And in those 60 seconds, there are 2 things that you need to communicate to me. One is, what is it that you do? And more importantly, why should I care? People do a pretty good job usually of the first, and they do a horrible job of the second. And again, that's that first 60 seconds. So if you get me what you do and why I should care, why I should care may not be me personally. It's like, why does this matter? You get those 2 things in the first 60 seconds, you probably got the person's attention. And then the other thing that I'll leave you with, I think, is actionable in 12 hours, is this notion of show, don't tell. The more you can show me what you're doing through examples and illustrations versus telling me what you are going to do, the more engaged I'm going to be. And, think about the speakers that you have listened to. Think about all the pitches you've been on the receiving end of any kind. If the person is simply presenting to you information, how emotionally engaged do you get with what they're doing? Probably not that much. I don't think most people do. You might be intellectually engaged if it's a topic you care about, but if it's a pitch, it's hard. But if they get under your skin with showing you what they're doing, helping you understand why you should care, why it's important, and then go back to my notion of obsession. Not like, spit out of your mouth kind of obsession, right? But like, real belief in it, but in a show mode versus a tell mode. It's a little bit like the magic trick of when you're trying to sell to somebody, you want it to be their idea, not something that you have to convince them of. It's the same kind of thing. You want the person that's on the investing side to start to be like wanting to be part of what you're doing rather than evaluating, the work efforts.
Good counsel. Brad, thank you very much on behalf of Entrepreneurs Organization, the MyEO Deal Exchange team. I actually